feel like this is a team where and we can only count on maybe one hand the amount of teams that we could really say are serious threats for a World Series. The Mets are. The Mets are a real contender.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
And welcome back in, fans of the orange and blue, for a very special edition of Tony Metro Live. What is going on, guys? It is the All-Star break, but that doesn't mean that there isn't always something to talk about with the New York Mets. And really, no one better than we would want to hear from than someone that is in the know with all the inner workings of the team itself. And that is the gentleman right here in the box next to me, Will Sammon, terrific writer for The Athletic, contributor to all the Major League Baseball, but specifically covers the New York Mets as well. So, Will, welcome to the show. First of all, I just wanted to say the All-Star break's a great time for everybody to catch their breath. The players, number one, myself as a fan, but I'm sure you in the media as well. So are you enjoying this little respite?
Thanks for having me first. And yes, it's nice to kind of exhale for a little bit. I think at a certain point, though, you sort of itch for it to resume. At least I've gotten to that point. So I'm happy that we reached the point where we could take a little bit of a break, but at the same time, it's almost over and games pick back up on Friday.
Will, tell me in your words, just your impression of the Mets here in the first half. They're obviously sitting a half game behind the Phillies. They got off to the very hot start. July was a bit tumultuous for them, a lot of injuries along the way as well. But where they are right now, what is your feeling about this team?
Well, I think that if you were to say to yourselves in spring training, like, hey, this is where the Mets were going to be at the All-Star break, you probably would have signed up for it. I think at least, especially when you take in consideration the amount of injuries that they were hit by in spring training. Once those occurred, then you were like, sure, I definitely take where you're at the All-Star break. However, the way and the road that they took to get there, I think it left a little bit like left to be desired for because you had that run in June where things kind of went off the rails for a little bit, and that kind of derailed a little bit of progress that and a little bit of momentum that they had going. But in the big picture, look at it, I think you take it. I think it's a pretty good first half for the Mets, especially when you consider the context of the injuries that they were dealt with and some of the problems that they had offensively, where they didn't get contributions from all nine guys by any means. And so I think all in all, you kind of have to take all that into the equation and look at it from afar and say, okay, where they're at right now, it's probably a good place to be.
I want to start by asking you right off the bat, what would you say is the biggest need for this Mets team if they want to capture their first division title in 10 years?
I think first and foremost, it's obvious they need help in the bullpen. I think when you look at this roster, you probably see a need and an opportunity for at least two more additions. And that doesn't even include having Brooks Raley, the lefty, come back off the IL and make his season debut pretty soon, if not right after the All-Star break. So at a certain point with Reed Garrett and Brauzabon, it got to the point where they were just using them way too much in these high stakes situations, these high leverage spots, and it eventually caught up to them. The idea of who you have getting the ball to Edwin Diaz remains a question, a very fair question there. Aside from that, I feel like this week still has a lot to say as far as what the rotation is, right? Because this is finally the first week where Sean Manaea makes a return as a starting pitcher. We saw him make that relief appearance, and it's the group that in spring training people thought it would be. So we're finally getting to see that. Is it enough? I'm not sure. And I'm also not sure if you could find somebody that's all that much better for a playoff rotation in the market than what you already have. Because I do think that the Mets feel like Frankie Montas may be a playoff option. Otherwise, they would not have signed that guy to the deal that they signed him for, probably. So if they think that he is, maybe they don't go after somebody like a Mitch Keller. I'm not sure. And center field remains something that I feel like they could seriously look at and look to upgrade.
You talked about third base as well, as far as Ronnie Mauricio, who came up first big league action in a year and a half since tearing his ACL in the Dominican League. Mark Vientos, what a significant step back he has taken from hitting clutch home runs all throughout October last year. And then there's Brett Baty, who was probably the most highly touted third base prospect of all of them when he was drafted in the first round back in 2019. And unfortunately, just hasn't been able to find his footing in the big leagues now over the past 3 years. I'll just ask you directly, Will, which of those three guys do you see, if any, being traded at this year's deadline?
If I had to guess, just to kind of give you a name and not give you a bad answer or one that's kind of evasive, I'll probably throw Brett Baty out there as the guy who probably makes the most sense to be traded, just because he has that minor league option too. That if a team wants to acquire him and maybe not want to put him in the majors right away, they could do that. Although I will say that if you are probably acquiring Brett Baty, it's to play him every day and to sort of know what you have in him. And right now, I'm not sure how much the Mets are willing to do that with him because they could go Jeff McNeil at second base over him. So I think he still brings some value too. I think he's somebody that I don't even think that the Mets, frankly, would be all that surprised if he were to get traded somewhere and be that change of scenery type of guy and who does really well somewhere else. I think he has that in him. They probably have to make a decision this year, I think, when it comes to him, because again, he's reached that threshold where he's no longer this prospect like somebody like an Acuna even or Ronnie Mauricio, where we don't really know what he is at this point. We're starting to have a pretty good idea of who Brett Baty is, at least for the Mets. But again, that's just my own speculation, not reporting it.
Would you see Ronnie Mauricio potentially getting the starting third base job and then an opportunity for Vientos to get more reps at designated hitter if that were the case of Baty getting traded?
I think that it could play out whether Baty's on this team or not. Honestly, I think that highly of Ronnie Mauricio. I think that that's in the sort of list of options that this could play out with, right? Like, but I feel like he has the most potential of all those guys that you mentioned. And like I said, every time I see him, I want to see more of him. I feel like he's better defensively than I thought he would be. His play at third base has been pretty impressive. And I do feel like he's showing some signs with the plate discipline. And working with Juan Soto has certainly helped. You can only go up from where he is. He's probably one of the most raw players I've ever seen as far as plate discipline goes at seeing him at the major league level. So he can only go up. And that's always going to be part of his game, to be honest. I think Carlos Mendoza has said that a few times. And it's part of his game, and it allows him to tap into what he does great, which is reach those exit velocities, those far, distances with the home runs, that kind of loud contact. So it's all part of the package with him. There's some room to grow there, but I feel like he's the best as far as talent goes they have when you talk about their young group.
Now turning to David Stearns here. He's now a year and a half plus here on the job as president of baseball operations for the team. Do you expect Stearns to be very aggressive at improving this roster at the deadline?
Well, he has to be open to doing more this time around, right? Because there's Juan Soto on this roster, there's Lindor, there's Pete Alonso, there's things that make you happy from a pitching standpoint. I know that it wasn't the way that they wanted it to be as far as the injuries go, but they still have a pretty solid roster here. And I feel like you owe it to them to make it even better. I feel like this is a team where, and we can only count on maybe one hand the amount of teams that we could really say are serious threats for a World Series. The Mets are. The Mets are a real contender. They really they are. They deserve that acknowledgement. And I think that you have to, if you're the Mets, understand that and be open to that aggressive behavior that separates that from the guys from the teams that aren't in that grouping. That said, the market will dictate how aggressive I think he is allowed to be, because we're probably looking at a trade deadline where there aren't a whole lot of teams that are going to be in that seller bucket. Right now, there's probably just a few that may grow between now and the trade deadline to include maybe a handful more, but it's not going to be a long list to choose from. So you need a dance partner for that. I think that their farm system has reached that point of maturity where it is a pretty solid farm system. Like it's not number one, two, or three in baseball, but it's probably, I'd say, within the top 10 to 15, somewhere in that first half of teams. And it's reached a point where there are a lot of pitching prospects within it, guys that maybe the average fan has never even heard of. And so I'm not even talking about like a Jonah Tong or a Brandon Sproat. There's so many other intriguing possibilities for teams that are guys that people like in the industry that probably should be on the trade block, that you're willing to part with just because you have so many of them at this point, that's what they're there for, sort of thing. Like you're not going to bring all of them with you here. And so you have to, like we've talked about, be able to distinguish between which ones are worth bringing with you and which ones you could, deal with and part from and feel okay about knowing that you're going to solve some issues for the current major league roster.
Steve Cohen is among the most willing owner to spend his money on this team and to shell out cash when necessary. But he's also been quoted in the past as recently as spring training and saying spending money is not necessarily the best way to build a sustained winning culture either. How willing do you think Stearns and Cohen will be to take on cash for contracts here in 2025 and ones that might have longer term deals heading in toward the future as well?
Well, they want to win. I think that they've made that pretty clear. And I think that as much as Steve Cohen has said, and prudently so, of like, hey, it's not going to be endless as far as the cash goes. Like there are limits here. When you read back that quote, it's interesting that he says that, Steve Cohen, but at the same time, he hasn't really shown us that a lot, right? Because he has gone the extra mile for Pete Alonso. He has certainly gone the extra hundreds of miles for Juan Soto. Like we've seen him in the mix for these marquee free agents time and time again. And so like on one hand, I do believe him that his heart is saying like, hey, we're not endless here. We got to do things smart. But knowing a little bit about Steve Cohen, the guy wants to win. And so I think that he wants to see this through in a way that lands them a championship. And I don't think that it's going to come at the cost of a few $1 million here or there at the trade deadline. I think that they're good as far as bringing on extra money. That's never been an issue under Steve Cohen. I don't foresee that being an issue. And as much as he talks about sustainability, which I think he definitely wants to do, we've yet to see him sort of stop himself from going that extra mile and attempt to make this a winning organization.
All right, Will, give me one player that you think will be on this roster that is not currently on the roster right now via trade.
I'm gonna go pretty weird and say someone like Adam Kittredge for the Orioles reliever, just because he has a monster salary. He's a pretty good relief pitcher. He's a proven guy, and I feel like that sort of checks out as far as the amount of money that they're willing to take on. I know that's not a glamorous answer. It's probably a safe answer for accuracy purposes, though, and so I'm gonna go with that.
If there was one big name prospect in this system right now that you expect to be traded at this year's deadline, who would you go with?
I probably will say my answer, truthfully, is nobody. But if I was pressed to give a name, I'd probably go Jet Williams, just because of the amount of middle infielders that they have coming up, the ones they have at the major league level for that matter. And he's a guy that's really good, and he's on the cusp of being major league ready. And that appeals to a lot of teams, whether they're teams that are in the hunt for a playoff chase that feel like, hey, we're probably not a World Series team. And so maybe we want to do something that helps us next year or the year after. And he also appeals to teams that are not in the hunt whatsoever, who need to retool a little bit and get better. So I feel like he's that type of guy. I think his on base percentage skills are real. And he's somebody that appeals to a lot of different teams.
I'm going to give you three names. These are all speculative, but of these three names, who do you think would be the most likely to be on the Mets roster after the deadline? Jaron Duran, Cedric Mullins, and Eugenio Suarez.
I'm gonna go Mullins as the most likely. And I say that because he's the should be the most easiest person of the three to get, because there aren't a whole lot of teams that are looking for center fielders. There are some. But he's also not in the same situation of Duran, who is under contract for a little while. He's not going to be a free agent. Cedric Mullins is. And so that makes him a little bit easier to trade. The Orioles will be looking to trade him, I would assume. He's a priority for them to trade and get something for him while they still can. And so I suspect they will. And I also suspect that the Mets will be in the mix for him. That's just my gut, knowing that, hey, center field's an option. Mullins would fit them in a good way. He's great defensively, can help with the bat offensively, and fits into what they're doing as far as speed and the bases go. So for me, I would put it in an order of maybe Mullins, Duran, and Suarez, just because the market for Suarez, if the Diamondbacks choose to trade him, is going to be really high. There are a handful of teams that are looking for that type of help, and I also don't know if the Diamondbacks or the Red Sox, for that matter, will be interested in trading those guys, because, a week from now, they may be very much still in the hunt for the playoffs and they may not want to trade those guys. As things stand, the Diamondbacks probably should trade Suarez, but we'll see. We'll see. That could easily change.
Well, as I said in the beginning, never a shortage of topics to talk about with the New York Mets, especially not around deadline time. Will, I want to thank you so much for joining us here on Tony Metro Live. Guys, be sure to follow him on Twitter and, of course, subscribe to The Athletic, where he does some wonderful work covering the New York Mets. Will, thank you so much once again. Any final words from you?
Hey, I just appreciate being on with you, man. It should be a fun second half for the Mets. And so anytime you need me, feel free to hit me up.
Absolutely. Well, guys, you heard it here first. Thank you again to Will. I'm Tony Metro. Until next time, stay true to the orange and blue.